everything good over there?
It's trying, to say the least. You know, everything is a mystery, and everything is a lot different. And so we're just going to have to see how it works out with patients and that whole side of it. Let alone starting something online like, hey, sports parents and sports doctors, and good luck to me.
Well, good thing that you're not starting today, that's for sure.
Let alone trying to do a documentary, right?
Oh man, that is even worse. That is truly even worse. But you know what? We're still, by doing a lot of these Zoom talks, we're getting a lot done.
Well, by the way, yesterday, Jonathan Jones would be glad to talk with you.
Beautiful.
Yeah, you know, again, he's a major player in writing with the NFL, and he had that great article, you know.
Yeah, it was.
Talk about pressure on a kid. So he's got some interesting insight, and he said he'd be glad to speak with you. So I will send you his email. And then if you want to use it, I think it might be a nice asset to have CBS Sports in that world on our side.
Oh my God, for sure. No complaints on my part. I'm definitely looking forward. Send it to me later, and I'll immediately message him. For sure. By the way, so for those people who don't know who you are, could you give us a brief introduction of who Dr. Robert Weil is?
Okay, Dr. Bob. Yes, I'm a sports psychiatrist for 4 decades. I'm the host of the Sports Doctor radio show. I've been doing radio shows somehow, again, almost 4 decades. And we have different guests in so many different areas, Joe, from around the world, as well as locally, whether they're doctors, whether they're authors, whether they're athletes, whether they're nutritionists or physical trainers. And that whole world has gotten me very, very involved in your world, in what you're doing, which is the whole world of youth sports and keeping these kids safe, keeping this whole situation in perspective. And it's a real challenge.
It really is, isn't it?
Yes, it seems to, with all the great information, and I consider my show to be an educator and incorporating, you know, where some of these major groups have taken part in the show, you being one of them. My friends at iSport 360, great communication between parents and coaches, our friends at the National Alliance of Youth Sports, who since 1981 has been working on educating coaches in recreational areas, our friends who from England, Gordon McClelland, and working with parents in sports, and with all of the emphasis and attention, the giant elephant stays in the room, which is this increasing overkill. It's one of the reasons, Joe, that I co-authored the book, #Hey Sports Parents, because there's an epidemic with capital letters of youth sports overuse injuries, both physically and mentally.
Yes.
You know, overzealous parents, overzealous coaches. You know, it's interesting. When you and I first started speaking a couple of years ago already, it seems, you talked about your title was going to be, you know, the film, the $15 billion a year youth sports industry. And as we would go along and converse over these past couple of years, it was the $17 billion a year industry. It was the 19. Now it's the $20 billion a year youth sports industry. There's a lot of great positive sides to youth sports that many of us love as coaches of our kids and parents of kids who play. But there's this, again, gigantic overuse side with injuries, with exasperated parents and coaches. You know, a year doesn't go by that we don't see instances of ranting, raving parents, fist fights on the sidelines, overzealous coaches, and it's created a youth sports and drug tremendous problem with many of these adolescents and youngsters living on over-the-counter pain medicines because they got to play and the pressure's on. So, the challenge is definitely there, and I'm looking forward to where our children play, the challenge of youth sports to finally happen. Even though the world is upside down, I'm really excited to see that you're still working.
Oh, absolutely. No, we're not stopping at all. Here, let me ask you something from a medical perspective, because, well, you're the expert in that. You talk a lot about, because obviously that's what you do, about making sure that adults and kids wear the proper shoes. Could you explain why that's so important so that everybody understands the importance of it?
Well, one of the common things is that foot imbalances are very common. People could think of someone who's flat-footed. People could think of somebody else who's got high arches, bow legs, knock knees. The biomechanics, the feet are the first major shock-absorbing mechanism of the body. And a lot of times the feet themselves cause problems above. And being in the right shoe ends up being very, very important, whether it's being fit properly. 50% of us aren't even fit properly. When it comes to even athletes, it's a real challenge. And then being in the right type of shoe for your particular foot mechanics. Is your son or daughter, and generally we recommend using a sports shoe that's designed for the sport, soccer, tennis, basketball, running, whatever it happens to be, and making sure that you are fit properly, and then also making a big deal out of these kids strengthening their feet and ankles. Ankle injuries are still number one in the whole world of sports. And usually these kids are more concerned about, how much they can curl with a dumbbell or do a bench press instead of paying attention to strengthening those areas. So these are the things, especially in sports podiatry. And again, it starts with being in proper shoes, and we want to pay attention to that. Foot type is inherited very often. It's surprising a lot of people where we might see that this young boy or girl has bunions or hammer toes, just like their mother, just like their grandmother. And this is why we pay a lot of attention to history when we're looking to prevent problems.
Yeah, isn't it fascinating that so many parents are willing to spend thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars for 50 billion different kinds of private coaching. But the two things that parents seem to refuse to take is strengthening, conditioning, agility, those type of things, LTAD basically, and proper shoes and or equipment. I mean, they're willing to buy $50 for a ball, but they're not willing to spend the proper.
Yes, I think there's a lot. Again, we just mentioned some of our colleagues in those different worlds, educating parents, educating coaches. One of the biggest problems I have seen over the years, and it's part of our whole world of the book, #Hey Sports Parents, is parents think that the coach is a know-it-all, knows everything. And we see that that's one of the biggest challenges and problems we see, is that the coach does not know everything when it comes to dealing with injuries or preventing injuries or enhancing performance. So we try to tell parents and coaches to be educated and to pay attention to history. One of the most interesting tests we do with any of these boys or girls, we want to see how well they balance on one foot. I can't tell you how crucial that is, and being able to pay attention, again, to things like history. Has your son or daughter had a history of problems with their feet or ankles? Your daughter's a young tennis player. Has she had knee problems? Have they had lower back problems? And then we can start paying attention to trying to do the two things everybody cares about. One is, can I prevent injuries? And two, when indicated, can we enhance performance? Our friend Gordon McClellan across the pond in England with his organization, working with parents in sports, again, pays so much attention to the role of parents, their interaction with their children themselves, their interaction with their coaches. But you can't expect a coach to be an expert in any aspect, especially when we're talking about younger kids and youth sports. So we want parents to be educated, and I think your documentary is going to be a big weapon for everybody.
Well, that's certainly our hope that that's exactly what's going to happen. When you have kids and parents in your office, how do you see the relationship there? Are parents usually pushing for a quick solution? Are kids more understanding of what needs to be done and more patient? How does that work?
That's a great question. And I think it's very important that I'm communicating with that boy or girl themselves. I'm including them in my questioning and discussion. And then I try to very professionally and positively include the parents and their involvement, because often we'll see, especially when we're talking overuse injuries. Injuries are in two categories, Joel. One is acute injuries that just happened. You slid into second base, you sprained your ankle, you got hit with a ball, there's an injury, it just happened, it's called an acute injury. Overuse is much more vague. Dr. Weil, I don't remember when my son's ankle started bothering him. I just know when we get to 2, 3, 4 days a week on the soccer field or on the tennis court or on the ice, he's hurting. And many times those things have a lot to do, again, with biomechanics, with that particular boy or girl's agility, their strength, and bringing them into the conversation. And I can't tell you how often, when I ask a young, let's say 12-year-old, questions about what's bothering you, or can you point to me where you're having discomfort, and I can't tell you, I got news for you, almost always it's the mom who's the head of the whole deal in the world of youth sports, in order for them to answer to them. And that's one of like what you're talking about. I make a big deal also with whose goal is it regarding this particular youngster. I'll tell you a quickie story. One of my poster boys, Joel, as you know, is a young boy figure skater who grew up in Naperville, Illinois, Evan Lysacek. And Evan Lysacek was the 2010 men's Olympic gold medal figure skating champion. But he was a 10-year-old little boy when I first put orthotics in the skates and saw him in the office and saw him over the years. I mean, you never know when you're going to come across a gold medalist. I'm still showing slides of him, and we're celebrating the 10th anniversary. But my point was, on my radio show, The Sports Doctor, I had, after he won the Olympics, a few weeks later, his mom on the show, you weren't overdoing it. It wasn't your goal, that whole parent concern. And she said, Dr. Weil, Evan had to be on the ice at 6:15 in the morning every day, and I never had to wake him up. There he was, ready to go, and I couldn't think of a better answer if I was a film producer like you to that particular question.
Yeah.
Discussion, I really low-key these kinds of pressures with these parents who many times are exasperated because this problem has been ongoing, because he's competing next week, or we trying to make the team. And this is a very, very big concern where, again, we'll see adolescents taking over the town of pain medicine, trying to stay. And this is one of the biggest things I tell parents. If your child needs pain medicine to participate, you're over the line. I call it intelligent rest. You need to back off. Recovery is so important. And this is still one of our, this mom and dad and or coach and this youngster to be realistic and to understand that we can't overdo it. And I call it the terrible twos, Joel, whether we're doing too much, we're trying to return to action too fast, too aggressively, and we end up in this repeat of these kinds of problems. So that kind of communication, including the kid, I feel is crucial.
Yes, and I can see, like, especially these days when we don't know if we're going to play again, we don't know when we're going to play again, we don't know what we can be doing. And
So
yet,
this is a totally unique situation. You know, this pandemic and this virus, this unknowing of so many things. You know, whether or not I believe very strongly that youth sports absolutely will return.
oh
At
yeah,
what level or in what scope, this is going to be, you know, very challenging and very, very interesting to see. But overall, as we've seen youth sports become serious business, like you mentioned, year-round training, specialty coaches, all of this attention. I remember Evan, he was growing up, we had a massage therapist, we had sports psychology, we had nutrition, and this is the kind of attention sports parents need to be getting very, very involved in. There's a lot of great information out there, but you know, we're still treading water when it comes to how much improvement we've really, really made. I mean, you're a sports parent. How you doing, man?
well, that's kind of like, you know, I see it with all these posts online from people freaking out if we don't reopen immediately and then the kids don't start playing again or performing again. And I just keep thinking, what's the rush? Because that's the same mentality that causes kids to get hurt so much. It's constantly pushing without understanding
safety. And this is, again, there's no definite answer to this.
No, there isn't.
Going along, you know, as best we can. But even in the generality of the challenges of youth sports at all sorts of different levels, where again we've seen, for example, Tommy John surgery. Everybody knows what Tommy John surgery, famous Yankee pitcher, all those decades ago. You know that over 10-15% of Tommy John surgery today is on adolescents?
Yep.
You know, with all the attention to pitch counts and, again, being very cognizant of not overdoing it, et cetera, and the more talented the boy or girl, the more we start to see this kind of intensity, you know, builds up. And this is one of the biggest concerns that we talk about with parents and or coaches, whether or not this youngster is dealing with consistent problems, whether it's overuse from just too much, or there's just too much intensity, or in some of the sports, in my book, I call them the prodigy sports, even though I want to let everybody know absolutely, Joel, we recommend in sports medicine that children play multiple sports. We recommend it. There's no doubt about it that there's less injury trouble with playing lots of different sports, using the body in different ways. However, if your son, this is when I get the resistance, Dad. When your son or daughter is a figure skater, or is a hotshot tennis player, or soccer, or gymnastics, this is what they want to play. And this then becomes a real challenge. I call them the prodigy sports, where we're telling parents, if that's the case, where you could argue all day, then we recommend, you know, these repetitive motion injuries. Think of a tennis player who's swinging the racket at 500 times a week, and the tendency, or we're running every day, we're doing cross country, et cetera, and we're just pounding those legs, and the more the better. And then he says, you remember the old axiom, we all grew up with it, no pain, no gain. Oh, Vince Lombardi, you know, you got to be pushing it. You got to be And this has become, in sports science, one of our greatest obstacles. Again, it's overkill with a capital O.
Yeah, because it's also, I think, a misunderstanding of what no pain, no gain actually is supposed to mean.
Great point.
Yeah.
I agree with it. You know,
just like competition today.
You know, with a little bit of soreness or, you know, fatigue, you know, the new science today, one of the biggest things is recovery. Are you getting enough rest? You know, especially with some of these year-round programs. You know, one of my favorite guests was Lou Vickery, pitched for the Yankees and the Cardinals in the 60s. He used to have a great radio show called Lou in the Morning, and I was a monthly guest of his for 3-4 years before he started retiring. And he was down there in Alabama in the Florida area, and he was talking about year-round youth baseball and those kinds of challenges. And, you know, where parents were, you know, thinking much more is much, much better. And then we start running into these kinds of concerns with these, again, overuse or repetitive motion injuries. So I tell serious sports parents, besides the coach, you want to be under the supervision of a solid physical therapist or personal trainer who can pay attention to your individual son or daughter, their specific sport, and come up with programs that can help prevent trouble. And one of the chapters in my book, you notice I keep pushing the book. You know,
as you should. It's a good book.
Called 2 Essential Exercise Systems. I don't care what your son or daughter plays. I don't care what their age or what their level. Those 2 exercise systems are strengthening feet and ankles with rubber bands, where you can do you can be the best athlete in the world. You don't have overdeveloped ankles. It's a weak link, and you could, any 10-year-olds do rubber band exercise. Strengthening feet, ankles with rubber bands, and work balance. Get these kids on teeter-totter boards. Get you on teeter-totter boards, on mini trampolines. I still have great slides of John McEnroe balancing on one foot. The great Bob Guida, the great sports therapist, who was my mentor in the whole world of sports medicine, he would call it instability training, work balance. So whether this young boy or girl is throwing a ball, whether they're playing volleyball, whether they're doing basketball, whatever it is, they will benefit hugely. When parents say to me, I want my son or daughter to be 2 steps quicker, I'm saying strengthen your feet and ankles. Work on balance. If we put sensors on the body of you or a young athlete, and we had them balance on one foot on a mini trampoline or a BOSU or one of those instability boards, every muscle in their body will light up. All the balance systems and the stabilizers that allow you to land, that allow you to change direction, that allow you to work on stability. And those are the kinds of things that we try to add. I don't care how much the kid could bench press, or how big his biceps, or how big her shoulder muscles are. You really care about these functional muscles. And kids love working on balance, having fun. You have these kids play catch, balancing on mini trams. And this great piece of equipment called the sand dune stepper, which simulates balancing in sand. But no matter how strong your son or daughter is, no matter how well trained they are, injuries happen. And the better the young boy or girl is, you know, when you see on TV the Olympics with a 15, 16-year-old gymnast, or the last 2 national women's champions in figure skating was a 14-year-old, then you could just imagine when these kids have started. It ain't for everybody. It's not for everybody, you know, but I'll tell you, Joe, my late, great sports psychology associate, the late Jim Vickery, who spent 3 or 4 years in the 90s with me on the radio, and I would drag him along to the Little League meetings with parents, I might talk about the best shoe and when to use ice and all of these things. And he would talk about parent behavior. And he would talk about the whole mental side of things. And he had some interesting bullets for these sports parents. And number one was, don't be a critic with your son or daughter. He'd say, if you don't have something good to say, don't say it. And he'd say, you know, be a good listener. Listen to your son or daughter. This was one of these things that Gordon made such a big deal about with his work with parents in sports, listening to these youngsters. And he also made a big Dr. Vickery, which was, if youth sports becomes a job, becomes like a drill for these kids, they will quit. And the famous American Little League, which we're all very familiar with, we all loved it growing up. A couple of decades ago, they woke up one day, Joel, and they said, holy cow, 35, 40% of these kids aren't re-signing up. What's going on? And they listened, and they found out between, you know, the Little League World Series being on ESPN and making these kids into, you know, national, they found out that these kids were tired of the pressure to win. And, you know, I call it children playing adult sports with adult rules. And sometimes, like you've always said, and like Dr. Vickery said, it has to be fun, no matter how serious these sports are. When you're talking about 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds, fun really, really has to be included. And once it becomes a drill, these kids go, not for me.
It's unfortunately the one thing that it's always interesting to me is how science changes all the time. And that's the beauty of it. We find new things every day or every few months or whatever it is. We find better ways to do things. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about science, that there's always some new ways that we can do something, that we can understand the body better. Just like for years and years and years, we always thought that, oh, kids are kids, so they don't need rest. And now a lot of studies have been made of how important, even for the kids, not just for the professionals, resting between games, resting between practice, getting a good night's sleep, eating properly, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, people sometimes, Joe, you know, children are not little adults. The growing body is a different animal.
Exactly.
And be treated with respect. You know, I would have young hockey players. They were playing triple headers on the weekend. I mean, what are you, crazy? Or going to the tennis tournament and having a couple of matches a day, and then these parents sitting down and saying, no wonder 3/4 of these kids are hurting.
Exactly.
You know, and they're hiding often the problem because they don't want to PO their mom or dad. What do you mean your ankle still hurt? We took you to 10 doctors already. Stop complaining. You know, this is, you know, so behavioral science. And I've seen some great improvement in that whole area with many of these groups paying very, very big attention to including the development of that young athlete with all their other life skills. Where they want to pay attention to that young boy or girl's behavioral development, everything in their life choices and all of these things. And this has gained tremendous, you know, the word mindfulness, for example, mind-body connection. You know, medicine didn't know how to spell that 20 years ago. Now it's become a very big deal, and I think youth sports is paying a lot of attention. But again, we're still faced with the elephant in the room with just overdoing it and scheduling even money. You know, traveling teams. You know, one of the experts in my new group, Hey Sports Parents, the sports doctors in, and if people go to the sports doctor online, they could find out all sorts of information. But I have a financial person on our team, and he talks about one of the biggest challenges with youth sports parents is the affordability.
Oh, for sure.
Ice time, or traveling teams. And again, the more talented these kids are, the more we start to see the traveling team and the sports clubs start to become involved. And the tendency is, again, the more the better. You know, I have been disassociated. I used to be very, very involved with a very world-class volleyball club in the local area. And I used to show up once a month during the season, every other month. We would do some screenings. Again, what's your son or daughter's history? Let's watch them stand and walk. Let's watch them balance. Let's talk about shoes, et cetera, et cetera. And I found out that half these kids were very reluctant to admit they were hurting. We're running into this big time in the concussion concern. Concussion is a huge topic on the sports doctor. You know, the famous Brian Urlacher, this is the facetious, the linebacker, Hall of Fame linebacker of the Chicago Bears. He was talking about that if he got his bell rung or really felt he had a head trauma and he came to the sidelines, he'd tell the coaches, you know, my foot hurts. So he sports with coaches and or trainers is getting these kids to admit that maybe they're a little dizzy, there's a concern, and again into injuries. I don't want to disappoint my coach. I don't want to be on the sidelines because there's protocol. I've got a pitch count now, and this is why we tell kids, be honest. Let's work on these kinds of communications. And if your son or daughter has a coach who can't understand this and can't communicate this with the parents, then change coaches.
And that's the hard part, though, because there's so many coaches, vast majority of coaches, don't understand it, don't seem to care. Because if you don't appreciate the fact that your players maybe get hurt, it doesn't have to be as serious as a concussion. It can just be even a broken finger, which, of course, is painful and important as well. But we have to create a culture that does accept the fact that, look, we're humans, we can get hurt, and once we're hurt, we should not be playing because long term that's going to kill us. You know, maybe a broken finger is not going to.
So you could take a simple, fairly new overuse problem. Gee, you know, the young boy has shin splints. He's running cross country. Or, you know, the young tennis player, her knee's hurt. And you could try to push through it, try to get away with it, try to mask it, and end up with a surgical problem. Or end up with a problem that knocks this kid out of the box for months because
That's what I don't understand.
Well, this because is, again, I ask my guests in the world of youth sports all the time, besides their area of expertise, Joel, I always ask them how their sports psychology skills are. Because again, when you're dealing with parents and or coaches, besides the kids, then it becomes a contest sometimes to be able to deal, you know, with these kinds of questions, because there's no doubt about it that the problems really persist. But, you know, education, our friends at the National Alliance of Youth Sports, John Ainge and Greg Bach, they educate the recreational coaches around the world. With the armed forces, all these coaches who deal with kids. So besides the organizations and schools, they deal, again, in park districts, other areas, educating and coaching coaches to pay attention to exactly what we're talking about, from A to Z, to understand, hey, lighten up. Let's pay attention to the importance of recovery. Take a look at the new attention to nutrition and youth sports nutrition, which has gotten so much attention, knock on wood, and it wasn't all that long ago that it just wasn't paid very much attention to at all. Because if you're constantly dealing with it, I've had guests on the show, Joel, their specialty is eating disorders. And we were talking about dancers, wrestlers, figure skaters. And what do you mean you gained 5 pounds? You know, and these kinds of crazy, where the young wrestler's got a wetsuit on, he's in a steam room because he can't make weight, and he ends up with anorexia or all sorts of concerns. And, you know, these are all, you know, when you sit down, you'd say, come on, who's going to be that bent out of shape? And then you'd say, it's there. So the idea of education, spreading the word. I know that you have interviewed, you've included so many of our different connections, so many of our different colleagues in the world of youth sports, so many great coaches and great educators. And, you know, we just got to keep spreading the word.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think these days is so scary to me is how little we value education, how little we value learning, because we're so divided, even for things that shouldn't cause division. You know, a concussion is a concussion, whether you are a 10-year-old or 40-year-old. Obviously, at 10 is even worse. But we can't have parents who say, and I've heard this before, well, if my son has 3 concussions, that's when I'm going to call it quits. And I'm just thinking, well, the 2 prior ones are just as important as the 3rd one. Or when coaches say, nah, I know what I'm doing. I don't need to hear from doctors. I don't need to hear from trainers. I know everything.
The good news is this is changing dramatically. You know, I've been talking about this on the Sports Doctor 2-3 decades, give or take a few weeks. I'm very encouraged with the improvement in all areas of the importance of the educational part of all of this. And again, there's no doubt about it that the challenge remains. This is why we made a very big deal of adding that part to the title of your documentary. Not only where our children play, not only why they play, but again, these kinds of challenges. And right smack in the middle is the gigantic word education in all of these, you know, different areas. You know, are the parents on the sidelines with their kids playing sports? Is someone there responsible knowing what to do? If someone got an opinion, this is our good friend, Dr. Steve Horowitz, and his great organization, Team Safe. And he's got all of these protocols for people to be responsible. You know, well, who's going to call 911? Who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? These kinds of very, very important criteria, but we're making big progress. And I think people are hearing concerns like yours loud and clear, but right on top and along with your concerns are the fact that youth sports has gone from a $15 billion a year business to a $20 billion a year business. Scholarships, the pressure to play and the pressure to play hurt. And this is one of the reasons in the giant world of sports medicine, I'll throw this out to you guys, that I renamed the term performance enhancing drugs. And you want to know what I renamed them, Joe?
What?
Performance surviving drugs. Think about it. There are cheats. There always have been, there always will be cheats. But 90% of all of this, the pain pills, the anti-inflammatories, going back was because that player felt they had to play, they're going to lose their position, they're not going to be there for the scholarship, who knows whatever else, they're going to disappoint somebody else. And if that's even close to reality, that's got to make us aware that we've got to take a few steps back and say, let's slow down a little bit with all of these different areas and understand, that you can't have your 12-year-old playing tennis 6 days a week and stay out of trouble. There's just no way. Or, the young figure skater doing 150 double jumps a week as they're growing. But this is the reality. So for some of these special kids who are those kinds of levels, we try to put a team around them this is what I'm looking to do with Hey Sports Parents and Sports Doctor In. I'm putting on my quarterback's hat so that I can refer to or reference you as the sports parent, putting you together with someone in nutrition, putting you together with someone whose expertise is physical training, putting you together with somebody who might be involved in the whole mental side of these kinds of concerns, so that you can make your experience not only safer but more productive. And this is why I have almost overwhelmed you with all of my experts that I've been involved with all of this time, to try to get them to be involved and included in this documentary you've got coming up.
No, but that's what, and I appreciate it so much, because that's what talking to as many people as I've had the luxury of doing is exactly what I think is going to make this project so much better, because we will be hearing from all of these different aspects.
Yes.
Because to me, one of the things that is so important in the youth sports world is, and a lot of times we kind of lose sight of, is that we don't pay attention. We think that it's you play, then you go home. You play, you go home. You play, you go home. There's nothing there to worry about. They're kids. They can play umpteenth time. Look at that kid. I forget where it was from at the moment, but that kid who we talked about that yesterday. That kid who pitched 90 pitches
Yes.
in 2 innings or 2.2 innings, whatever it was, and then pitched the next day.
Yes. That still
when
goes
you have
on.
Professionals don't do that.
No.
And it's like, wait a second. How can that make sense in a parent's mind?
Well, it doesn't. But I think we're making tremendous inroads again. There's a lot of youth sports, and I really wanted it to be a big part of everything we're doing. There's a lot of great stuff. Some of the best families I have met over the decades, fantastic people with all the best of intentions in mind. And that continues to be a big part. But like Gordon McClellan was talking about with his working with parents in sports, like Dr. Vickery, the late Dr. Vickery said, parents need to be good listeners. They need to be able to get, instead of telling their kids what is supposed to be the experience and being this overlord, they need to be able to talk to these relationships. One of my experts, Natalie Graves, is a social worker who in Chicago, her specialty is youth sports. And she's dealing again with families and pressures and all sorts of interactions, again, of that family, which might be very much faced with single parent families and underprivileged situations, and the kinds of demands on some of these kids. And the reality is, in the world of social work or psychology, these are big challenges. That's why when I talk about the epidemic, Joel, of youth sports injuries, I say it is physical plus mental. And parents need to be aware of what their boy or girl is going through regarding, interactions with their coach or these kinds of situations. Be good listeners and trying to stay out of some of these traps that we fall into. And there's a lot of them. And you just mentioned one where we still have people out there who are overdoing it, who are convinced, that more is better. And I call these know-it-all coaches in the book Svengali coaches, and where we would have these kids, we're all familiar with what's gone on in the world in big-time gymnastics, where we had these overzealous, over-demanding coaches, where kids would travel across the world, across the country to work with these coaches, would be scared to death to tell them about an injury. And this whole situation that came out involved with that, and it's nuts. And we have to continue to work on, paying attention for this kid, to bring it up. We didn't leave out in our discussions the whole world of the sexual abuse side of things. This is, it's just, or the nightmare of pain pills. that we're dealing with in the United States, and the opioids. These athletes don't take those medicines unless they got to play yesterday and they're hurting. This is
No, and
$5 million. I'm expecting you to play hurt. It's nuts.
It's nuts. And abuse in general, not just sexual abuse in general, is so prevalent with coaches and or parents.
Blindside a lot of us, Joel. You know, whether it's the clergy, whether it's the teaching profession, whether it's the coaching profession, where we've woken up and continue to wake up with, holy cow, we just have to be, again, aware and educated. We have to talk to our youngsters to pay attention about this. I mean, the mental coach of the Olympic gold medal women's and girls gymnastics team, the mental coach wasn't aware of what many of them were going through because they were scared to tell them. They were scared.
Oh, no, it's scary.
So
it's truly scary out there.
It's a very big deal.
It's scary. I've seen personally parents hitting their kids and no one saying a word. And when I did bring it up, I was told to shut up, and I was told that's how it's done. Leave it alone.
Really? What the heck league are you in? I'll tell you, in the world of volleyball, where we were talking with these international teams, and the Americans, one of our groups, was playing against the Japanese in an exhibition match. And this was a Bengali coach, one of our coaches. Yet, what was going on the Japanese side, where the coach turned around and whacked one of these players, knocked her down.
Mm-hmm.
And the Americans were like, their eyes were like saucers. And the American coach said, "You think I'm tough?" Where we saw that kind of instance, that insanity, you know, at the international level, where again, many youngsters would think, is that what it takes to me to get to, you know, those kinds of levels? So, you know, that's an extreme. You understand that that's an extreme, but it definitely is, you know, one of the big parts of this. And the more talented your son or daughter is, the more these kinds of pressures come down on us. But I would think that any parent who exhibits that kind of behavior should be banned from that particular league or activity. It's just not acceptable.
No, it's not even close to be accepted. And, you know, look at Tom Izzo at Michigan State, or that famous Indiana coach, Bobby Knight, thank you. So it's just like and it's not, those are just the most obvious examples, and yet there's so many at the 10-year-old level. And it doesn't always have to be physical. So many times it's mental, and that's, I think, it's even worse if you can compare.
Yes, psychology friends have paid big attention to that at all sorts of different levels. Again, and this is why our friend Ian Goldberg with iSport 360 was paying so much attention to this relationship between parents and coaches, the communication, to be very involved with those kinds of interactions to try to prevent as much as possible that kind of behavior. But as you get into some of these clubs, and as you get into some of these high-level specific, again, these prodigy sport clubs, gymnastics, tennis, even soccer, where you have these very, very talented kids. This is what they're doing year-round. Then we again start to see, the big word is the intimidating coach, who really becomes far too influential. And sometimes this is when we see, you hear these stories by some of these psychologists who get the feedback from these kids and we're really, really taken aback. Kids were under that. Again, this
No, I know. It's a very tricky thing. Like, perfect example of these things is like when I hear, I spoke to a very big European club, soccer club, and they have a lot of academies here in the United States. And I asked them, it's like, okay, just out of curiosity, how many kids have you brought from here and brought them back to Europe? And they told me, out of all the kids they've seen all around the country, and out of all the kids they've seen within their academies, they picked 5. And out of those 5, 1 made the team back in Europe.
There's no doubt about it. You know, if you're the best soccer player in your league, or if you're the best tennis player in your community or state even, you then go to college, you realize everybody's as good as you, maybe better. And then if you 1 out of millions, maybe you end up becoming a professional. So those are the kinds of realities that we all need to pay much, much more attention to. And again, continue to make big attention to the goal, which is the experience of youth sports. For the kids, for the parents, for the coaches, should be positive in as many different respects. We should stress the positive experiences, and we should weed out these clowns who don't belong in this particular area. And there's still plenty of them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So where can people find you, Dr. Bob?
If they go, the best route is to go to sportsdoctorradio.com, and there they can go to radio shows and they could listen to whatever they would like, see the topics and subjects. You know, we have over 30,000 followers on Twitter. I get a lot of guests on Twitter and LinkedIn. So at SportsDoc, DOC Radio, and I'm very excited about our new project, Hey Sports Parents, the Sports Doctors In. And if they go to thesportsdoctor.online, they can get access to that particular project. And then I'm looking forward to being on the big screen with you.
I can't wait to be able to come to Chicago and interview you in person.
The virus got in the way, but we're looking forward to you making it, Joel. That's for sure.
It will happen. You just have to be patient and just get organized.
I hear you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Doc. I really appreciate your time. I know you're busy, so I don't want to take too much more of your time. So thank you so much.
Yes, it's my pleasure.